And then I heard it, a sound. So faint at first, I thought it was a trick of the water, a figment of my panicked imagination. A tiny, muffled sound, coming from deep inside the leather tomb. My blood didn't just run cold. It froze solid in my veins. No, it couldn't be. Please, God, don't let it be what I'm thinking. The thought was so monstrous, so unthinkable, that my mind tried to reject it. But my body knew. My instincts screamed. I pulled faster, more desperately, a wild strength born of pure terror surging through me. I dragged the suitcase onto the wet sand of the shore and fell to my knees beside it, my whole body trembling. My hands fumbled for the zipper. It was stuck, the metal swollen and rusted from the water. My fingers kept slipping on the slick, wet leather. Come on, come on, come on, I repeated through clenched teeth, my voice a frantic, desperate chant. Tears of frustration and fear started to blur my vision, hot against my cold cheeks. I forced the zipper, once, twice. With a final desperate heave, it burst open. I lifted the heavy, waterlogged lid, and what I saw inside made the entire world stop. My heart stopped beating. The air caught in my throat. My hands flew to my mouth to stifle a scream that threatened to tear me apart from the inside out. There, wrapped in a soaked, light blue blanket, was a baby. A newborn baby, so small, so fragile, so terrifyingly still. His lips were a bruised purple color. His skin was as pale and translucent as wax. His tiny eyes were closed. He wasn't moving. Oh my God! Oh my God! No! The words were just whispers, breaths of horror in the silent afternoon. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely touch him. With a gentleness I didn't know I still possessed, a gentleness I hadn't used since Louis was an infant, I lifted him out of the suitcase. He was cold, so cold. He weighed less than a bag of sugar. His little head, with a dusting of dark, wet hair, fit perfectly in the palm of my hand. His umbilical cord was still attached, crudely tied with a piece of ordinary string. String, not a sterile medical clamp. Plain household string. As if someone had done this at home, in secret, without any help. No, 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 I whispered over and over, rocking his tiny, lifeless body. I pressed my ear to his chest, praying for a sound, any sound. Silence. Nothing. I pressed my cold, wet cheek against his nose, a final, desperate act of hope. And then I felt it. A puff of air. So faint, so ephemeral, I thought I'd imagined it. But it was there, a tiny, miraculous flutter of life against my skin. He was breathing. Barely. But he was breathing. I scrambled to my feet, clutching the baby to my chest, his coldness seeping into my own skin. My legs nearly gave out beneath me. I ran. I ran toward the house faster than I had ever run in my life. Water dripped from my soaked clothes, leaving a dark trail behind me. My bare feet, having lost their sandals in the mud, were cut and bruised by the stones and gravel on the path. But I felt no pain, only a primal, all-consuming terror, only a desperate, roaring urgency, only the need to save this tiny life that was trembling against my heart. I burst through the back door into my kitchen, screaming. I don't know what I was screaming. Maybe help, maybe God, maybe just incoherent sounds of pure panic. I grabbed the old landline phone from the wall with one hand while holding the baby securely with the other. I dialed 911. My fingers slipped on the wet buttons. The phone almost fell from my grasp twice. 911, what's your emergency? A calm female voice said on the other end, a voice from another, saner world. A baby, I sobbed, the words tumbling out in a torrent of hysteria. I found a baby in the lake, in a suitcase. He's not responding. He's cold. He's purple. Please, please send help. Ma'am, I need you to calm down. Tell me your address. I gave her my address, the words a jumbled mess. The operator, bless her, was patient. She told me to put the baby on a flat surface. I looked at my kitchen table, cluttered with mail and newspapers, and the remnants of my solitary breakfast. With one wild sweep of my arm, I sent everything crashing to the floor. Plates, papers, a vase of wilting flowers, nothing mattered. I laid the baby gently on the wooden table, so small, so fragile, so terrifyingly still under the harsh kitchen light. Is he breathing, ma'am? The operator asked, her voice a steady anchor in my storm of panic. My voice was a high-pitched shriek I didn't recognize as my own. You tell me. Look at his chest. Is it moving? Look, I sobbed. Barely. Very, very barely. It was a movement so subtle, so shallow, I had to lean in close to see it. the tiny rise and fall of his chest. Yes, I said, a wave of relief washing over me. I think so. Very little. Okay, listen to me very carefully. I'm going to guide you. I need you to get a clean, dry towel and dry the baby very carefully, then wrap him up to keep him warm. The ambulance is on its way. They're just minutes out. I did what she said, moving like an automaton. I ran to the bathroom, grabbed a stack of clean towels from the linen closet. I dried his tiny, cold body with clumsy, desperate movements, terrified of hurting him, terrified of not doing enough. Every second felt like an eternity, stretched thin and taut with fear. I wrapped the baby in 2 thick, clean towels. I picked him up again, cradling him against my chest, trying to transfer my own body heat to his. I started rocking him, a slow, rhythmic motion I hadn't realized I was doing. An ancient instinct, one I thought I had buried with Louis, had resurfaced. Hang on, I whispered to him, my lips against his damp hair. Please hang on, little one. They're coming. They're coming to help you. The minutes it took for the ambulance to arrive were the longest and most agonizing of my life. I sat on the cold linoleum of the kitchen floor, the baby held tight against me. I sang to him. I don't know what I sang. Maybe the same lullaby I used to sing to Louis when he had a fever. Maybe just meaningless humming sounds. I just needed him to know he wasn't alone, that someone was holding him, that someone, somewhere in this cruel world, wanted him to live. The wail of the sirens broke the silence, growing louder and louder until it filled my quiet house. Red and white lights flashed through the windows, painting the walls in frantic, strobing colors. I ran to the door, fumbling with the lock. 2 paramedics rushed out of the ambulance. An older man with a kind, weathered face and a gray beard, and a young woman with dark hair tied back in a tight ponytail. Her face was all business. She took the baby from my arms with an efficiency that somehow broke my heart. She checked him quickly, her fingers expertly finding the faint pulse in his neck. She pulled out a stethoscope, listened intently to his chest. Her face showed no emotion, but I saw the muscles in her shoulders tense. Severe hypothermia, possible water aspiration, she said to her partner in a clipped professional tone. We need to move, now. They placed him on a tiny gurney, no bigger than a doll's bed, and put a miniature oxygen mask over his tiny face. Their hands worked fast, a blur of motion, connecting wires, monitors, things I didn't understand. The older paramedic looked at me, my soaked clothes, my bare, bleeding feet, my shaking hands. You're coming with us, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a command. I got into the back of the ambulance, sinking onto the small side seat. I couldn't stop staring at the baby, so tiny and lost among all that life-saving equipment. The ambulance took off, the sirens wailing again, a scream that mirrored the one in my own soul. The world blurred past the windows into streaks of green and brown. How did you find him? The young paramedic asked as she continued to work, her eyes never leaving the baby. In a suitcase, I said, my voice hoarse. In the lake. I saw someone throw it in. She looked up from her work, her professional mask slipping for just a second. She stared at me, then looked at her partner. I saw something in her eyes. Worry, maybe. Suspicion. Pity. Did you see who it was? She asked gently. I opened my mouth. I closed it again. Cynthia, my daughter-in-law, my son's widow. The woman who had wept at Louis's funeral as if her entire world had ended. The same woman who had just tried to drown a helpless baby in a cold lake. How could I say that? How could I even believe it myself? It was too monstrous, but it was the truth. Yes, I finally said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. I saw who it was. We arrived at the County General Hospital in less than 15 minutes, a journey that felt like a lifetime. The emergency room doors flew open before the ambulance had even come to a complete stop. A swarm of people in white and green scrubs surrounded the gurney, a whirlwind of controlled chaos. They were shouting numbers, medical terms I couldn't comprehend, clipped orders. They rushed the baby through a set of double doors, and I tried to follow, but a nurse with a firm but gentle hand stopped me. Ma'am, you need to stay here. The doctors are with him. We need some information from you. She led me to a small, sterile waiting room. The walls were a bland, institutional cream color. The chairs were hard, unforgiving plastic. The air smelled of disinfectant and quiet desperation. I sat down, and a violent shiver racked my entire body. I didn't know if it was from the cold of my still damp clothes, or from the deep cellular shock that had taken hold of me? Probably both. The nurse sat across from me. She was older than the paramedic, perhaps around my own age. She had kind wrinkles around her eyes, a sign of a life spent caring for others. Her name tag said Eloise. "I'm going to need you to tell me everything that happened," she said in a soft, soothing voice. And so I told her, every single detail. From the moment I poured my tea and saw Cynthia's car kicking up dust, to the moment I opened that terrible suitcase. Eloise took notes on a tablet, her fingers flying across the screen. She nodded occasionally, her expression unreadable, but she didn't interrupt. When I finished, my voice raw and broken, she let out a long, slow sigh. "The police will want to talk to you," she said, her voice laced with a sadness that went beyond professional duty. "This is attempted murder, maybe worse. Attempted murder." The words hung in the air like black circling vultures. My daughter-in-law, my son's wife, a murderer. My mind couldn't process it. It couldn't reconcile the grieving widow with the woman who had just tried to drown a baby. It was impossible. It was the truth. Eloise placed her warm hand on my cold one. "You did the right thing," she said. "You saved a life today." But it didn't feel like that. It felt like I had ripped the cover off something dark and foul, something I could never push back into the darkness. It felt like I had uncovered a truth that would change everything, forever. 2 hours passed, each minute a slow, torturous crawl. I just sat there, staring at the cream-colored walls, replaying the scene at the lake over and over in my mind. Finally, a doctor came out to talk to me. He was young, maybe 35, with deep, dark circles under his eyes that spoke of long hours and too much tragedy. His hands smelled of antibacterial soap. "The baby is stable," he said, the words clipped and devoid of emotion. "For now, he's in the neonatal intensive care unit. He suffered severe hypothermia and aspirated a significant amount of lake water. His lungs are compromised. The next 48 hours are critical." "Is he going to live?" I asked, my voice a broken whisper. "I don't know," he said with a brutal, unsparing honesty that was both a cruelty and a kindness. "We're doing everything we can." The police arrived half an hour later. 2 officers, a woman in her 40s with her dark hair pulled back in a severe, tight bun, and a younger man who took meticulous notes in a small spiral notebook. The woman introduced herself as Detective Fatima Salazar. She had dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through lies, right into the broken corners of your soul. They asked me the same questions over and over, approaching the story from different angles, searching for inconsistencies, for cracks in my narrative. I described the car, the exact time, Cynthia's frantic movements, the suitcase, everything. Detective Salazar stared at me with an intensity that made me feel guilty, even though I'd done nothing wrong. "And you're absolutely certain it was your daughter-in-law, Cynthia?" she asked, her tone sharp. "Completely sure," I said, though a tiny sliver of doubt, born of the sheer monstrosity of the act, tried to worm its way into my mind. "Why would she do something like this?" "I don't know." "Where is she now?" "I don't know." "When was the last time you spoke with her before today?" 3 weeks ago, I said, my voice barely audible. "On the anniversary of my son's death." Fatima wrote something down, her pen scratching against the paper. She exchanged a quick, unreadable look with her partner. "We're going to need you to come to the station tomorrow to make a formal statement," she said. "And you cannot, under any circumstances, contact Cynthia. Do you understand?" I nodded mutely. What was I going to say to her anyway? Why did you try to kill a baby? Why did you throw him in the lake like a piece of trash? Why? Why? The officers left. Eloise, the kind nurse, came back with a thick wool blanket and a steaming cup of tea. "You should go home," she said gently. "Get some rest, change your clothes." But I couldn't leave. I couldn't leave that baby alone in this sterile, impersonal place. That baby I had held against my chest, who had breathed his first real gasp of hope in my arms. I stayed in the waiting room. Eloise brought me a set of dry clothes from the hospital's storage, scrub pants that were far too big, and a t-shirt with the hospital logo on it. I changed in the public bathroom. I looked at myself in the mirror. A stranger stared back at me, a woman with wild eyes, tangled hair, and a face that looked like it had aged 10 years in a single afternoon. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in that hard plastic chair, watching the clock on the wall, its second hand sweeping in an endless, agonizing circle. Every hour I would get up and ask the nurse at the NICU desk about the baby. The answer was always the same: stable, critical, fighting. At 3 o'clock in the morning, a familiar figure appeared in the waiting room doorway. It was Father Anthony, the priest from my local church. Someone must have called him. He sat down next to me in the silence. He didn't say anything for a long time. He was just there, a quiet, solid presence in the fluorescent glare of the hospital night. Sometimes that's all you need. Not words, not platitudes, just proof that you're not completely alone in hell. God tests us in many ways, Betty, he finally said, his voice a low, comforting rumble. This doesn't feel like a test, Father, I replied, my voice hollow. It feels like a curse, he nodded slowly. He didn't try to convince me otherwise with empty reassurances about God's mysterious ways, and I appreciated that more than any sermon he could have given. When the sun began to rise, a pale, watery light filtering through the waiting room windows, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. I had crossed a line. I had seen something I could never unsee, and whatever came next, I would have to face it, because that baby, that tiny, fragile being fighting for every single breath in the room down the hall, had become my responsibility. I hadn't chosen it. It had been thrown into my life, quite literally. But I couldn't abandon him, not after pulling him from the water, not after feeling his faint, fluttering heartbeat against my own. The sunrise came and went without me even noticing. Light streamed through the waiting room windows, painting the cream-colored walls a pale, hopeful orange that felt like a lie. I had spent the entire night in that plastic chair. My back was a solid knot of pain. My eyes burned from lack of sleep and unshed tears. But I couldn't leave him. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the brown leather suitcase sinking beneath the dark water. I saw that still, pale little body. I saw his purple lips. Eloise appeared at 7 in the morning, her shift just beginning. She carried a cup of coffee and a foil-wrapped sandwich. "You need to eat something," she said, her voice gentle but firm as she pressed them into my hands. I wasn't hungry, but I ate anyway because she just stood there, waiting, her kind eyes filled with a concern that felt real. The coffee was too hot and burned my tongue. The egg salad sandwich tasted like cardboard, but I chewed. I swallowed. I pretended I was a normal person doing normal things on a normal morning. "The baby is still stable," Eloise said, sitting down next to me. "His body temperature is slowly rising. His lungs are responding to the treatment. It's a good sign." "Can I see him?" I asked, my voice filled with a desperate longing. She shook her head regretfully. "Not yet. Only immediate family, and we don't even know who the family is." Family. The word hit me like a stone. That baby had to have a family. A mother, Cynthia. But she had tried to kill him. So who was the father? Where was he? Why hadn't anyone, anywhere, reported a baby missing? The questions piled up in my head, a confusing, terrifying mess with no answers. At 9 o'clock, Detective Fatima Salazar returned. She was alone this time. She sat across from me, a manila folder in her hands. Her expression was hard, inquisitive. She looked at me as if I were the prime suspect in a crime I hadn't even committed. "Betty, I need to ask you a few more questions," she said, her voice all business as she opened the folder. "I already told you everything I know. I know, but some inconsistencies have come up." "Inconsistencies?" The word floated between us like an accusation. I felt my stomach clench into a tight, painful knot. "What kind of inconsistencies?" Fatima pulled a photograph from the folder. She placed it on the small table between us. It was Cynthia's silver car, unmistakable. But it wasn't parked by the lake. It was in a crowded supermarket parking lot. "This photo was taken by a security camera at a supermarket 30 miles from your house," she said, her eyes fixed on my face. "Yesterday, at 5:20 in the afternoon?" 5:20. 10 minutes after, I saw her by the lake. Impossible. I stared at the photo, my mind reeling. It was her car, the license plate was clear. But it couldn't be. "There must be a mistake," I said, my voice shaking. "I saw her. I was there. I saw her throw the suitcase. Are you completely 100% sure it was Cynthia?" Fatima pressed. "How close were you?" I swallowed hard, the truth suddenly feeling flimsy. 100 yards. Maybe more. I saw her from behind mostly. The gray dress, the dark hair, the silver car. "I was sure," I said. But even to my own ears, my voice sounded less convincing. Fatima leaned forward, her dark eyes pinning me in place. Betty, I need you to be honest with me. What is your relationship with your daughter-in-law? Do you get along? And there it was. The real question. The one I had been dreading since the police first showed up. Because we didn't get along. We had never truly gotten along. From the day Lewis introduced us, I knew something was off about her. She was too perfect, too polished, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. The world stopped spinning. The words didn't make sense. I heard them, but my brain refused to process their meaning. My grandson, impossible. Lewis died 6 months ago. He didn't have any children. Cynthia was never pregnant. She never said a thing. That's impossible, I whispered, shaking my head. The results are conclusive, said the man in the suit. His voice was deep and steady. I'm Dr. Alan Mendez, a specialist in forensic genetics. We ran the tests twice to be absolutely certain. The baby shares approximately 25% of his DNA with you. He is definitively your biological grandson, the son of your son, Lewis. The son of Lewis. My Lewis. I felt as if someone had hit me in the chest with a sledgehammer. Lewis had a son he never knew he had, a son that someone had tried to drown in a lake. But how? My voice sounded distant, as if it belonged to someone else. Lewis died 6 months ago. Cynthia never said anything about a pregnancy. Exactly, Fatima said, leaning forward, her eyes boring into mine. Cynthia was pregnant at the time of the accident. According to our calculations, she became pregnant about a month before Lewis's death, which means she knew. The room was spinning. Cynthia knew. She knew she was pregnant when Lewis died. Why didn't she say anything? Why did she hide the pregnancy for 9 long months? Why did she give birth in secret and then try to kill her own son, Lewis's son? I don't understand, I said, tears starting to blur my vision. Why would she do something like that? He's her son. He's Lewis's son. That's what we need to find out, Fatima said, her voice grim. But there's more, Betty. I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. I braced myself. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew it would be worse. We've been reinvestigating your son's accident, Fatima continued. And there are inconsistencies. Big inconsistencies. What kind of inconsistencies? Lewis's car was examined after the accident. The official report said it was a skid due to the rain, but we asked for it to be re-examined by our top forensics team. They found evidence of tampering with the brakes. Someone sabotaged them. The word landed like a bomb in the silent room. Sabotage, murder. My son hadn't died in an accident. He had been murdered. Cynthia, I said. It wasn't a question. She is our prime suspect, Fatima admitted. But we need proof, and we need to find her. She has completely disappeared. She hasn't used her phone. She hasn't touched her bank accounts. It's like she vanished into thin air. I stumbled up from the chair. I needed to move. I needed air. I walked to the window, though there was nothing to see but a brick wall. Outside, the city glittered with millions of lights, normal lives, normal people, while I was trapped in this impossible nightmare. My son? I whispered against the cool glass. My baby, she killed him. No one answered. There was nothing to say. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Aline, the social worker. There's something else you need to know, she said softly. About the baby, about his future. I turned around. Her eyes for the first time looked genuinely kind, but also deeply sad. Given that the baby is your biological grandson, you have legal rights. You can petition for custody. She raised a hand before I could speak. But it will be a long, difficult process. There will be evaluations, home visits, psychological interviews. And in the meantime, the baby will have to remain in state care. No! The word came out like a roar. You are not taking him from me. He's all I have left of Lewis. He's my grandson. My blood. I understand, Betty, Aline said. Believe me, I do. But the system has its protocols. And after everything that has happened, we need to ensure the baby is safe. He'll be safer with me than with any stranger. Maybe, she said, her voice gentle but firm. But that decision isn't up to me. It's up to a judge, and the well-being of the child will be the only consideration. Dr. Mendez spoke for the first time since his initial revelation. There's another factor we must consider. The baby suffered a severe trauma, hypothermia, near drowning. The next few weeks will be critical for his neurological development. He will need specialized care, perhaps therapy, and constant medical follow-up. "I'll do whatever it takes," I said, my voice shaking with a fierce resolve. "Anything." Fatima stood up. "Betty, I need you to understand something. You are no longer a person of interest. We believe your story, but you also can't just take the baby because he's your grandson. There is a legal process we must follow. And in the meantime, our number one priority is finding Cynthia. We need your help. How? Think. Did Cynthia ever mention a special place? Any property? Any friend or distant relative she might be hiding with?" I closed my eyes, forcing myself to sift through the few superficial conversations I'd had with Cynthia during the 3 years she was married to Louis. She never talked about her family. She never mentioned her past. It was as if her life had begun on the day she met my son. "She has an aunt," I said suddenly, a faint memory stirring. "Up north near the Canadian border. Louis mentioned her once. He said Cynthia grew up with her after her parents died." Fatima wrote it down quickly. "Do you have a name?" "I don't know. Louis never said." "It's a start," Fatima said. "We'll look into it." They all left then, except for Eloise. She stayed with me in that cold, empty conference room. "Do you want to see your grandson?" she asked. I nodded, unable to speak. She took me through a set of secure doors into the neonatal intensive care unit. She had me wash my hands and arms up to my elbows, then put on a sterile yellow gown. Then she led me to an incubator in the corner of the quiet, dimly lit room. And there he was. My grandson, Louis's son, so small, so fragile, hooked up to a web of tubes and wires. But he was alive. He was breathing. He was fighting. He had Louis's dark hair, Louis's perfectly shaped nose, Louis's long, slender fingers. "Can I touch him?" I whispered. "Yes, just be gentle." I reached my hand through the small opening in the side of the incubator. I touched his tiny hand. It was so soft, so warm. His little fingers, as if by instinct, closed around my index finger. It was just a reflex, I knew, but it felt like a promise. "Hello, little one," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I'm your grandma, and I promise you I am going to protect you. No one is ever going to hurt you again. I swear it on your father's memory." Eloise put her hand on my shoulder. "He needs a name," she said softly. "For the hospital records. Until we find the mother, or until a judge decides a name." Louis had wanted to name his first son, Hector, after my father. He had told me once during a Christmas dinner, his voice full of dreams for a future he would never have. "If I ever have a son, Mom, I'll name him Hector." "Hector," I said, my voice clear and strong. "His name is Hector." I stayed there all night, sitting on a stool by the incubator, holding his tiny hand, singing him the same songs I used to sing to Louis. I promised him a future I didn't know if I could give him, but I promised it anyway. Because now I knew the truth. This baby wasn't a stranger I had found by chance. He was my blood, my family, all that was left of my murdered son, and I wasn't going to let anyone, not the system, not Cynthia, not anyone, take him from me. The following days were a bureaucratic hell. I fell into a new routine. I would wake up every morning at 5, shower, dress, and drive the 30 minutes to the hospital. I would spend the entire day sitting by Hector's incubator, talking to him, singing to him, willing him to get stronger. And in the afternoons, the visits would come. Lawyers, social workers, police officers, all with their clipboards and folders, all with their endless questions, all with the power to decide if I was good enough, stable enough, young enough to raise my own grandson. Aline, the social worker, showed up on the third day with a long list of requirements. She read it in a flat, monotone voice, as if she were reciting an appliance instruction manual. "You'll need a comprehensive criminal background check, a full psychological evaluation, a complete medical exam, verification of your income and savings, and a thorough inspection of your home. You'll also need personal references from at least 3 non-family members, and you'll need to complete a 40-hour certified childcare course." 40 hours. As if I hadn't raised a son myself. As if I didn't know how to change a diaper or prepare a bottle. But I said nothing. I just nodded and took the stack of papers she handed me. "How long will all this take?" I asked, the weight of it all settling on me. "If you're lucky, 6 weeks," she said. "If not, it could be 3 months. 3 months. Hector could be discharged from the hospital in a few weeks, and he would be sent to live with strangers in a foster home for 3 months, while I jumped through bureaucratic hoops to prove I deserved to raise him. "And what about him in the meantime?" I asked, my voice tight with a rage I was trying to suppress. "When he's discharged from the hospital, he will go to a certified temporary foster family," she said, her voice betraying no emotion. "He will receive proper care. You will be allowed to visit him twice a week under supervision." Twice a week? Under supervision. As if I were a threat, as if I wasn't the one who had pulled him from a watery grave. That night I called Father Anthony. I needed references. I needed people who would say I wasn't a crazy, grieving old woman, that I was fit, that I could do this. The lake was a mirror, and I saw a ghost in it. Not a real ghost, not the kind that rattles chains or moans in the attic, but the ghost of a life that was. My life, the one that ended 6 months ago when they lowered my son, Louis, into the ground. I saw my daughter-in-law, Cynthia, throw a brown leather suitcase into that mirror, shattering the reflection, shattering everything. I ran, my heart a frantic bird against the cage of my ribs, and I heard a sound from inside the suitcase, a muffled, desperate sound. "Please, please don't let it be what I think it is," I whispered, my voice a dry rasp in the thick, humid air. My hands, wrinkled with 62 years of life, of love, of loss, trembled over the wet, stubborn zipper. I dragged the suitcase onto the muddy shore, its weight an impossible burden, and I forced the zipper open with a strength I didn't know I possessed. The lid fell back, and my heart didn't just stop. It imploded. It ceased to exist. What I saw inside made me shake in a way I had never felt before. A tremor that started deep in my bones and consumed me entirely. But to understand the horror of that moment, you have to understand the silence that came before it. How a quiet, unremarkable October afternoon curdled into the most terrifying scene I have ever witnessed. It was precisely 5:15 in the afternoon. I know this because the ritual of my loneliness was a strict one. At 5, I would put the kettle on. At 5:10, I would choose a tea bag, usually chamomile, for the nerves I didn't admit I had. At 5:15, I would pour the steaming water into my favorite cup, the one with the faded bluebells, and I would glance at the old regulator clock on the kitchen wall. It was my mother's clock, a relic from another time, its pendulum swinging with a slow, hypnotic rhythm, ticking away the empty seconds of my life. I was standing on the back porch of my house, the house where I had brought Louis home from the hospital, the house where I had taught him to walk and ride a bike, the house that now felt like a cavernous, echoing tomb, too big, too quiet, too full of ghosts since I buried him. Meridian Lake shimmered before me, its surface as still and glassy as obsidian. The air was hot, a suffocating late-season heat that was unusual for October in this part of the country. It was the kind of sticky, oppressive heat that makes you sweat under your blouse, even when you're standing perfectly still, a heat that felt like a premonition. Then I saw it, a glint of silver cutting through the thicket of pine trees that lined the old dirt road leading to the lake. Cynthia's car, a silver sedan that Louis had bought her for their first anniversary, polished and pristine, now moving like a silver bullet fired from a gun. A cloud of fine, red dust billowed in its wake, a furious plume against the placid green of the woods. My daughter-in-law, my son's widow, was driving like a madwoman. The engine whined, a high-pitched, unnatural roar that sliced through the afternoon calm. Something was wrong, terribly, fundamentally wrong. I knew that road intimately. Louis and I used to walk it every Sunday when he was a boy, him chasing butterflies and me pointing out the different types of birds. It was a narrow, winding path, full of potholes and loose gravel. No one drove like that on it unless they were running from something, or towards something they were desperate to be rid of. She slammed on the brakes right at the water's edge, a place where the dirt path softened into muddy sand. The tires screeched in protest, a sound of tortured rubber that made the birds in the nearby trees scatter in a panicked flurry. The dust cloud she'd created rolled over my yard and onto the porch, a gritty, choking fog that made me cough. The teacup, the one with the faded bluebells, slipped from my suddenly numb fingers. It hit the worn wooden planks of the porch floor and shattered into a dozen pieces, the sound lost in the thumping of my own heart. I didn't care. I didn't even look down. My eyes were glued to her, a tiny, frantic figure against the vast, indifferent backdrop of the lake. Cynthia practically vaulted out of the driver's seat, as if propelled by a coiled spring of pure desperation. She was wearing a gray linen dress, a simple, elegant thing I recognized instantly. It was the one Lewis had given her for their last anniversary, the one she'd worn to his funeral, a silent testament to her grief. Her dark hair, usually so perfectly coiffed, was a tangled mess, flying around her face like a storm cloud. Her face itself was flushed a blotchy, alarming red. She looked like she had been crying, or screaming, or perhaps both for a very long time. With a violent wrench, she opened the trunk of the car, pulling with so much force I thought she would rip the door clean off its hinges. And then I saw it. The suitcase, that damned brown leather suitcase. A knot of ice formed in my stomach. I had given it to her myself, a wedding gift, a symbol of a future I had so naively believed in. So you can carry your dreams everywhere, I'd told her on that sunny, hopeful day. How stupid I was, how blind. Cynthia pulled it from the trunk. It was heavy. I could tell by the way her slender body stooped under its weight, the way her arms, usually so graceful, trembled with the strain. She wasn't a strong woman physically. This was a struggle. She glanced around, a furtive, darting look, her eyes wide with a potent mix of fear and guilt. I will never forget that look. It was the look of a trapped animal, gnawing off its own leg to escape. Then she started walking toward the water's edge. Each step seemed to be an agonizing effort, as if she were carrying the weight of the entire world, or something much, much worse. Cynthia, I shouted from the porch, my voice cracking, thin against the vastness of the afternoon. But I was too far away, 100 yards or more. Or maybe she heard me and simply didn't care. Maybe my voice was just another sound to be ignored in her frantic mission. She reached the lapping edge of the lake. She swung the heavy suitcase once, a preparatory motion, her body twisting with the effort. She swung it again, higher this time, gaining momentum. On the third swing, a guttural sound escaped her lips, a cry of exertion and despair, and she hurled it with all her might into the placid water. The sound of the impact was like a gunshot, a violent rupture in the fabric of the afternoon. A flock of ducks took flight, their quacks a chorus of alarm. The water splashed high into the air, a silver geyser against the setting sun. For a moment, the suitcase just floated there, a dark, malevolent rectangle on the surface of the mirror. Then, slowly, inexorably, it began to sink. Cynthia just stood there, watching it go down, her shoulders heaving. Then she ran. She turned and ran back to the car as if the devil himself were snapping at her heels. The engine roared back to life. The tires screeched again, spitting gravel. She was gone, disappearing down the same dirt road, leaving behind nothing but a lingering cloud of dust and a silence that was louder and more terrible than any scream. I was paralyzed. 10 seconds passed, 20, 30, an eternity. My brain was a malfunctioning machine, trying to process the sequence of images I had just seen. Cynthia, the dress Lewis gave her, the suitcase I gave her, the lake, the sheer animalistic desperation in her movements. Something was terribly, horribly wrong. A chill, sharp and icy, ran down my spine, a stark contrast to the oppressive heat of the day. My legs started moving before my mind gave them permission. I ran like I hadn't run in 20 years. My 62-year-old knees screamed in protest. A fire started in my chest, a burning ache of exertion. But I didn't stop. I flew down the porch steps, my worn house sandals slapping against the wood. I ran across the dry, crackling grass of the yard and onto the dirt road. My sandals kicked up their own little clouds of dust. The lake was about 100 yards away. Maybe less, maybe more. I don't know. I just know that every second felt like a lifetime, every footstep a desperate prayer. When I reached the shore, I was gasping for air, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The water where she had thrown the suitcase was still rippling, the only evidence of the violence that had just occurred. The suitcase itself was still there, mostly submerged now, sinking slowly, defiantly. The rich brown leather was soaked, dark, heavy with its terrible secret. Without a second thought, without even rolling up the cuffs of my slacks, I waded into the water. The lake was shockingly cold, a thermal shock that jolted me to my core. The cool water climbed up my ankles, my knees, then my waist. The thick, silty mud at the bottom of the lake sucked at my feet, trying to pull me down, to claim me as another secret. I almost lost a sandal, feeling it slip from my heel, but I didn't care. I stretched out my arms, my fingers clawing at the water. I grabbed one of the suitcase's leather straps. I pulled. It was incredibly heavy, far heavier than any holiday luggage. It felt as if it were filled with bricks, or lead pipes, or worse. I didn't want to think about what could be worse. I pulled harder, my arms shaking from the strain and the cold. The water splashed into my face, blinding me. Finally, with a great sucking sound, the suitcase broke free from the mud's grip. I started dragging it backward toward the shore. She was calculating, and she was far too interested in the comfortable salary Lewis made as a civil engineer. "We're not close," I admitted, the understatement of the century. "Do you blame her for your son's death?" "What?" My voice was too loud, too defensive. "It's a simple question, Betty. Do you blame Cynthia for Lewis's death?" "The accident. That's what everyone called it. Lewis was driving home after a late dinner with Cynthia. It was raining. The car skidded on a patch of oil, they said. He crashed into a massive oak tree. Lewis died on impact. Cynthia walked away with nothing more than a few minor scratches and a story that never quite sat right with me. It always seemed too strange, too convenient. But I never had proof. I was just a heartbroken mother looking for anyone to blame. "I don't see what that has to do with the baby," I said, my voice tight. "It has everything to do with it," Fatima said, closing the folder with a sharp snap. "Because we haven't been able to locate Cynthia. She's vanished. Her house is empty. Her phone is off. And you, Betty, are the only person who claims to have seen her yesterday." Her words fell on me like ice water. She was accusing me. Not directly, but the insinuation was there, as clear as the fluorescent lights overhead. She thought I had made it all up, that I had found the baby some other way and was blaming Cynthia out of grief and revenge. "I didn't lie," I said through clenched teeth. "I saw what I saw." "Then we need to find Cynthia, and fast," Fatima said, her tone softening slightly. "Because if she's that baby's mother, he's in serious danger. And if she's not, then we have an even bigger mystery on our hands." Fatima stood up, her duty done. She handed me a business card with her number on it. "If you remember anything else, any detail, no matter how small, you call me." She left, leaving me with a maelstrom of questions and a growing, terrifying doubt. I sat there staring at the card in my hand, wondering if I was losing my mind. I had seen Cynthia, I was sure of it, but now doubt was seeping in like a slow-acting poison. What if I had been wrong? What if it was someone else who looked like her? What if my grief and my deep-seated resentment had made me see what I wanted to see? Father Anthony returned at noon, a small, well-worn rosary clutched in his hands. "Shall we pray?" he asked. I'm not a very religious woman. I never was. But in that moment, I needed something bigger than myself. Something to tell me I wasn't alone in this waking nightmare. I nodded. We prayed together in low, murmuring voices. The familiar words of the Hail Mary calmed me, even if I didn't fully understand how they worked. When we finished, I felt a little less broken. "The police think I'm lying," I told him, the confession a painful whisper. "The truth always comes to light, Betty," he replied, his voice full of a certainty I couldn't feel. "Even if it takes time." But we didn't have time. That baby was fighting for his life, and somewhere out there, Cynthia was hiding, or running, or planning her next move. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a different doctor came to see me. A woman this time older, with thick glasses and a serious, no-nonsense expression. "We need your consent to run some tests on the baby," she said, holding a clipboard. "I'm not his family." "We know, but you're the only responsible party we have right now. Social services is on the way, but in the meantime, we need to act. The baby needs a full panel of blood tests. We need to know if he has any underlying medical conditions, if he was exposed to drugs, if he has any internal injuries we haven't detected." I signed the papers without even reading them completely. I just wanted them to do whatever was necessary to save him. 2 hours later, the social worker showed up. Aline. She was young, too young for a job that carried so much weight, I thought. Maybe 25. She had short, practical hair, a drab gray suit, and a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mrs. Miller," she said, sitting down beside me, "I need to ask you some questions about your situation. I understand you're the one who found the baby." The story again, the questions again. But Aline was different. She didn't look at me with suspicion. She looked at me with pity, which was somehow worse. "Do you live alone?" she asked, her pen poised over a form. Yes. Do you have a stable income? I have my late husband's pension and some savings. Criminal record? No. Any history of mental health issues? Depression? Anxiety? I hesitated. After Lewis died, I had taken antidepressants for 3 months. My doctor said it was normal, that grief sometimes needs chemical help to be born. I had stopped when I started to feel a little more like myself again. I had depression after my son's death, I admitted, hating the way the words sounded. But it's over now. Aline wrote something down on her form. I couldn't see what. The baby will need a temporary home when he's released from the hospital, she said, her tone matter-of-fact. If he's released, social services will look for certified foster families. In the meantime, he will remain in state custody. State custody. Those 2 words broke something deep inside me. That baby, the one I had held against my chest, who had breathed his first breath of life in my arms, was going to be handed over to strangers, to a system, to people who would see him as just another case file, just another number. What if I wanted to? The words came out before I could stop them. What if I wanted to take care of him? Aline looked at me, surprised at first, then skeptical. Mrs. Miller, you're 62 years old. You're not a certified foster parent. You have no legal relationship to this baby, and you are currently a person of interest in an active criminal investigation. I didn't do anything wrong. I saved his life. I know that, she said, her professional smile softening slightly. But the system has protocols. The child's best interest always comes first. And frankly, your age and your recent emotional situation are factors we would have to consider. I felt like I had been slapped. Too old, too unstable, too broken. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was crazy to even think about it. But when I closed my eyes, all I could see was that fragile, perfect little body. And I knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that no one else in the world would love him like I could. That night, I went home for the first time in 36 hours. Eloise convinced me. She said I needed to shower, to sleep in a real bed, that the baby would be fine, that they would call me immediately if anything changed. I drove home as the sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and purple. The lake shimmered to my right, beautiful and deadly. I stopped the car at the exact spot where I had seen Cynthia, where I had pulled the suitcase from the water. I got out. I walked to the shore. The suitcase was gone, of course. The police had taken it as evidence, but I could still see the indentation it had left in the mud. I could see my own frantic footprints, now dried and preserved in the earth. I stood there as darkness fell, wondering if I would ever know the truth, wondering if Cynthia was watching me from somewhere, wondering what the hell had really happened on that quiet October afternoon. And then my phone rang. The screen flashed with the hospital's number. My heart stopped. Mrs. Miller, Eloise's voice said, tight with an urgency I hadn't heard before. You need to come back, now. I drove back to the hospital, breaking every speed limit, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. My heart was beating so loud I could hear it over the roar of the engine. Eloise hadn't given any details on the phone. She just said to come back now. Those 2 words were enough to fill my head with the worst-case scenarios. The baby had died. It had to be that. Why else would they call me with such urgency? He had fought for 2 days, and finally, his tiny body had given up. My rescue hadn't been enough. I hadn't been fast enough. I had been too late. I parked crookedly, taking up 2 spots in the nearly empty visitor's lot. I ran toward the emergency room doors. Eloise was waiting for me just inside the entrance. Her expression was serious, unreadable, but there was something else in her eyes, something I couldn't decipher. He's alive, she said immediately, as if she could read the terror in my mind. The baby's alive, but you need to come with me. She led me down hallways I didn't recognize, away from the waiting room, away from the NICU. We went up in an elevator to the 3rd floor. We walked down a quiet, deserted corridor. Finally, we reached a small, windowless conference room. Inside were Detective Fatima Salazar, Aline the social worker, and a man I didn't know. He was older, perhaps in his 60s, and wore a dark, expensive-looking suit and wire-rimmed glasses. He had the calm, serious face of a lawyer or a doctor. Please, sit down, Betty, Fatima said, pointing to an empty chair. I sat. My legs felt like jelly. Everyone was looking at me with an intensity that made me want to run. We received the results of the baby's DNA test, Fatima said. Her words fell like stones into still water. DNA? I didn't understand why they had done that. What could they possibly be looking for? And? I asked when the silence became unbearable. Fatima exchanged a look with the man in the suit. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. She opened a folder on the table and took out several official-looking papers. She placed them in front of me. The baby is a boy. He was born approximately 3 days ago, according to medical tests. Fatima paused, taking a deep breath. And Betty, he's your grandson. He came to my house the next day. He sat in my kitchen, drinking the same Earl Grey tea I used to make for Louis when he was a boy. Of course, I'll help you in any way I can, Betty, he said, his kind eyes looking at me over the rim of his cup. You're one of the strongest women I know. That child is lucky to have you, but I didn't feel strong. I felt old and tired and terrified. I was 62 years old. How was I going to chase a 2-year-old around the park when I was 64? How was I going to help him with his high school homework when I was 70? How was I going to be there for his college graduation, assuming I even made it to 80? I'm too old for this, I said, the words I had been thinking finally escaping my lips. Father Anthony looked at me. Sarah was 90 years old when she gave birth to Isaac, he said gently. Age is just a number when there's love involved. I wanted to believe him. I really did. On the 4th day, Eloise began to teach me how to care for Hector. The nurses were allowing me more hands-on time now. She showed me how to support his little head, how to change his tiny diapers, how to prepare his formula to the exact temperature. My hands trembled at first. I had forgotten how fragile newborns were, how completely dependent, how terrifyingly delicate. You're doing great, Eloise would say every time I panicked. But it didn't feel great. It felt like walking on thin ice. One wrong move and everything would shatter. On the 5th day, Detective Fatima returned with news. We found Cynthia's aunt, she said. She lives in a small town 100 miles from the border. We went to question her. She hasn't seen Cynthia in over 2 years. Says they had a big fight. Cynthia owed her money, $3,000, and never paid her back. Money. It always came back to money with Cynthia. Louis had earned a good salary as an engineer, close to $70,000 a year. He had savings, and he had a $200,000 life insurance policy. Cynthia was the sole beneficiary. Did she collect the insurance money? I asked, already knowing the answer. Fatima nodded. 4 months ago. $200,000 was deposited directly into her account. 2 weeks later, she transferred all of it to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. We're trying to track it, but it's complicated. $200,000, the price of my son's life. And she had hidden it away in some tax haven while planning to murder her own baby. Why, I said, the question that tormented me every single night. Why kill the baby? She could have given him up for adoption. She could have left him at a hospital. Why try to drown him? Fatima was quiet for a long moment. We have a theory, she finally said. We've been digging into Louis's finances. We found something interesting. 2 weeks before he died, he changed his will. The air left my lungs. He left everything to his future children. Not to Cynthia. To his children, Louis knew. Somehow he had known Cynthia was pregnant, and he had changed his will to protect his son. She killed him for the money, I whispered, the horrible truth solidifying in my mind. We believe so, Fatima said. And then she found out that the money from the will would go to the baby if he was born alive. So she decided to eliminate him too. The sheer calculated evil of it left me speechless. She had murdered my son. She had carried the pregnancy to term, hiding it from everyone. She had given birth alone. And then she had tried to drown her own baby. All for money. Do you have enough to arrest her? When we find her, yes, but she's still missing. She's smart. She knows we're looking for her. The days turned into weeks. Hector grew stronger. The doctors removed the tubes one by one. He started breathing on his own, feeding from a bottle, crying with strong, healthy lungs. He was a medical miracle, according to the doctors. No baby who had been through what he had been through should be doing so well. But I knew it was more than just medicine. It was willpower. It was Louis's spirit, living on in that little body, fighting, surviving, refusing to give up. I completed all the requirements on Aline's list. The background check came back clean. The medical exam showed I was healthy for my age. The psychological evaluation was the toughest part. A young woman with thick glasses asked me questions for 3 hours. How did you handle your son's death? How do you feel about Cynthia? Are you trying to replace your son with this baby? That last question angered me. I'm not replacing anyone, I said, my voice sharp. I'm saving my grandson. It's different. She wrote something down. I didn't know if it was good or bad. The home inspection was humiliating. 2 women in suits checked every corner of my house. They opened closets, checked the temperature in the refrigerator, measured the windows to see if they were safe, counted the smoke detectors, and asked me about my emergency plan in case of a fire. You'll need a certified crib, a changing table, safety gates on all the stairs, locks on the cabinets, and covers for all the electrical outlets, one of them said, ticking items off a list. I spent $1,200 on baby gear. My pension barely covered my basic expenses. I had to dip into my savings, but I didn't care. Hector was worth it. The childcare course was the worst. It was me and 15 young expectant mothers. They all looked at me like I was the confused grandmother who had wandered into the wrong classroom. The instructor was 25 and explained things I already knew with an insulting slowness. Babies need to eat every 3 hours. Babies cry when they are hungry or wet. Never, ever shake a baby. I nodded and took notes, even though I wanted to scream that I had raised a son to adulthood, that I knew exactly what I was doing. But I needed that certificate, so I swallowed my pride and pretended to learn. 6 weeks after finding Hector in the lake, Aline appeared at the hospital with a small, rare smile. You've completed all the requirements, she said. The judge will review your case next week. If all goes well, you could have temporary custody in as little as 2 weeks. 2 weeks. After 42 days of bureaucratic hell, I could finally take my grandson home. But that same night, just when everything seemed to be getting better, my phone rang. It was Fatima. Her voice was tense. Betty, I need you to come down to the station, now. We found something. Something about Louis you need to see. I arrived at the police station with my stomach in knots. Fatima was waiting for me at the entrance. Her face was more serious than usual. She led me through a maze of narrow hallways to a stark interrogation room. On the metal table was a cardboard box. Inside, I recognized Louis's personal effects. His wallet, his watch, his cracked and broken phone. The things they had returned to me after the accident. What is this? I asked. We finally managed to unlock his phone, Fatima said. Our tech guys worked on it for weeks. And we found something. She pulled out a manila envelope. She opened it and spread several printed sheets of paper on the table. They were screenshots of text messages between Louis and Cynthia, dated 2 weeks before his death. I read the first one. It was from Louis to Cynthia. We need to talk. I know about the baby. Cynthia's reply. I don't know what you're talking about. Louis again. I found the pregnancy test in the bathroom trash. Why didn't you tell me? There was a 3-hour silence in the exchange. Then Cynthia. I wasn't ready to tell you. I was scared. Scared of what? I'm your husband. We're going to be parents. This is wonderful news. Another long silence, then a single chilling message from Cynthia. I don't want to have it. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I kept reading, my hands shaking so badly the papers rattled. Louis. What do you mean you don't want to have it? Cynthia. I'm not ready. I don't want to be a mother. I want to travel, to live my life, not be tied down to a baby. Louis. He's our child, Cynthia. Cynthia. He's a mistake. Louis. Don't say that, please. We can make it work. I'll help you. My mom will help us. Cynthia. I don't want help. I want my life back. The messages grew more intense, more desperate. Louis pleading, Cynthia resisting, her replies growing colder and crueler until I reached the last exchange from the day before the accident. Louis. I spoke to a lawyer today, Cynthia. If you decide not to have the baby, I'm divorcing you. And if you do have him and don't want to raise him, I will fight for full custody. I am not going to let you hurt my child. Cynthia's final, ominous reply. You're going to regret this. Louis. Is that a threat? There was no reply. The next day, my son was dead. I dropped the papers onto the table. Tears streamed down my cheeks, hot and uncontrollable. She killed him, I choked out. She killed him because he was going to protect the baby. That's what we believe, Fatima said softly. And there's more. We checked Cynthia's phone records from that week. She made 3 calls to a freelance mechanic named Carlos Medina. We brought him in for questioning. And what did he say? He denied everything at first. But when we showed him evidence of the bank transfers Cynthia made to his account, $2,000 the day before the accident, he started talking. He admitted she paid him to sabotage the brakes on Lewis's car. I felt sick. I had to sit down, my legs giving way beneath me. Cynthia had planned it all. She had hired someone to murder my son, and she had made it look like a tragic accident. Why would this Carlos do something like that? Debts. He had a gambling problem. He owed $15,000 to some very dangerous people. Cynthia offered him $2,000 up front and promised $3,000 more later. He accepted. He's now under arrest as an accomplice to murder. And Cynthia, we have a warrant out for her arrest. First-degree murder and attempted murder. But we still haven't found her. She's like a ghost. I sat in that cold, sterile room, processing everything. My son had died trying to protect his baby. And that baby was now in a hospital, having survived an attempt on his own life by his mother. The sheer, unadulterated cruelty of it all was unbearable. What happens now? I asked, my voice hollow. We keep looking. We have her picture in every airport, at every border crossing. We have alerts out in hospitals, in case she tries to get plastic surgery to change her appearance. Someone will recognize her eventually. No one disappears forever. But I wasn't so sure. Cynthia had proven to be smarter and colder than I had ever imagined. If she had planned Lewis's murder in such meticulous detail, she had probably planned an equally elaborate escape. I went back to the hospital that night. I sat by Hector's incubator and watched him sleep. So innocent, so oblivious to the horror that surrounded his very existence. His own mother had tried to kill him, and I was all that stood between him and a system that would see him as just another file. Your dad loved you so much, I whispered to him, my voice thick with emotion. He died protecting you. And I'm going to finish what he started. I promise you. Eloise showed up with a cup of coffee. She sat next to me in silence for a while. I heard about the text messages, she finally said. I'm so sorry, Betty. I didn't know Lewis could be so strong, I said. He was always so gentle, so kind. But in those messages, he was a warrior, willing to fight for his son. Love does that, Eloise said. It makes you stronger than you ever thought possible. She was right. I was feeling it myself. I had never considered myself a particularly strong woman. But now, I was fighting the system, fighting time, fighting a fugitive murderer. All for this baby. The next few days were about preparation. I began the painful task of turning Lewis's old room into a nursery for Hector. I took down the rock band posters, the soccer trophies, the college photos. I painted the walls a soft, sunny yellow. I assembled the new crib, the changing table, the musical mobile that played a gentle version of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. It was agonizing to dismantle the sanctuary of my son's childhood, but it was necessary. Lewis was gone. Hector was alive, and he needed a space to grow. Father Anthony came to bless the room. He sprinkled holy water in the corners and prayed for Hector's protection, for my strength, and for justice for Lewis. God has a plan, Betty, he said, even if we don't always understand it. What kind of plan involves murdering a good man and nearly drowning a baby? I asked bitterly. The kind of plan that turns evil into redemption, he replied. Cynthia wanted to destroy this family. But look, Lewis left a legacy. You found a new purpose. That baby survived against all odds. Evil didn't win, Betty. Love did. I wanted to believe him. Some days I could. Other days, all I saw was the darkness. The court hearing for temporary custody was scheduled for a Tuesday. I wore my best suit, the same one I had worn to Lewis's funeral. Aline accompanied me. We entered a small, quiet courtroom. The judge was a woman in her 50s, with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and a stern but not unkind expression. She reviewed all my papers, the certificates, the references, the evaluations, the home inspection report. She read every page with painstaking attention. Finally, she looked up, peering at me over her reading glasses. Mrs. Miller, she said, her voice clear and authoritative, I have reviewed your case carefully. It is highly unusual. A 62-year-old woman petitioning for custody of a newborn grandson she only just discovered exists. But it is also highly unusual for a grandmother to save her grandson from drowning by pulling him from a lake. My heart was beating so loud I was sure everyone in the courtroom could hear it. I have spoken with the hospital staff, with the social workers, with your personal references, and they all say the same thing, that you are dedicated, loving, and capable, that that baby was lucky you were there that day. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but I held them back. I have also read about the ongoing criminal case, the judge continued, her expression hardening. About the suspicion that the baby's mother murdered his father and then attempted to kill the baby herself. It is a horrible, unthinkable situation. That child needs stability. He needs love. He needs someone who will protect him. She paused, and the silence in the room was deafening. Therefore, I am granting temporary custody of the child, Hector Miller, to his paternal grandmother, Betty Miller, for a period of 6 months. During that time, there will be monthly visits from social services and progress evaluations. At the end of the 6 months, we will review the case to determine if custody should become permanent. Congratulations, Grandma! The gavel struck the wood, and suddenly I could breathe again. I cried right there in the courtroom. I cried with relief, with gratitude, with fear, with the overwhelming weight of it all. Aline put her arm around me. You did it, she whispered. You're going to be able to take him home. 3 days later, 6 long weeks after pulling him from the lake, I took Hector home. Eloise helped me buckle him into his new car seat. She went over everything again, how to hold him, how to feed him, how to spot the signs of distress. You're going to be fine, she said, giving my arm a squeeze. And I'm just a phone call away if you need me. I drove home at 20 miles an hour. Every bump in the road terrified me. Every approaching car seemed like a threat. But we made it, safe and sound. I walked into the house with Hector in my arms. I took him to his new room. I laid him in his crib. He looked so small in that big space, so vulnerable. But he was breathing. He was alive. He was home. He was safe, for now. The first few weeks with Hector at home were the hardest of my life. I had forgotten how utterly exhausting it is to care for a newborn. The sleepless nights, the unexplained crying fits, the constant gnawing panic that I was doing something wrong. At 30, I had raised Louis with the boundless energy of youth. At 62, every sleepless night left me feeling shattered. But there were also moments of pure, unadulterated magic. When Hector would grab my finger with his tiny, perfect hand. When he would stop crying at the sound of my voice. When he would open those dark little eyes, so identical to Louis's, and look at me as if I were his entire world. In those moments, I knew every second of exhaustion was worth it. Eloise came 3 times a week. She taught me tricks I had forgotten, how to burp him more easily, how to swaddle him tightly so he would sleep better, how to differentiate his cries of hunger from his cries of pain. She became more than a nurse. She became a friend, a lifesaver. You're doing an amazing job, Betty, she would tell me every time. But I didn't feel amazing. I felt terrified. Every strange noise in the night made me jump. Every car that drove slowly past my house made me nervous. Cynthia was still out there somewhere, and even though the police said she had probably fled the country, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was close, watching, waiting. I had new locks installed on all the doors, security cameras on the porch, and an alarm system connected directly to the police. I spent another $800 I didn't have, but Hector's safety was priceless. One night, 3 weeks after bringing him home, I found something. I was finally organizing Louis's things, which I had stored in boxes in the spare room. His clothes, his books, his papers. At the bottom of a box, I found a journal, brown leather worn at the edges. I never knew Louis kept a journal. I opened it with trembling hands. The first few pages were from years ago. Thoughts about his job, about his friends, nothing important. But then I got to the entries from the last year, from the year he knew Cynthia. Met someone today. An entry from 4 years ago read, "Her name is Cynthia. She's beautiful, smart, mysterious. There's something about her I can't quite figure out. She intrigues me." I kept reading. The entries about Cynthia became more and more frequent. Louis was in love, completely captivated. But there were also seeds of doubt. Sometimes I feel like I don't really know her. She never talks about her family. When I ask, she changes the subject. It's like her life started the day we met. Another entry. I found Cynthia going through my bank statements today. She said she was just curious, but something felt wrong. Why would she look at that without asking me first? And then, the one that chilled my blood. dated a month before his death. Cynthia is pregnant. I found the test, but when I confronted her, she got furious. She said she doesn't want it, that it will ruin her life. How can she say that? It's our child. I changed my will today. Everything will go to the baby. I don't trust Cynthia with money. Not after seeing how she spends it. $500 shoes, $1,000 purses. She always wants more. But a baby isn't an accessory. It's a life, and I'm going to protect it, no matter what it costs. Tears fell onto the pages, smudging the ink. Louis knew. He knew something was terribly wrong with Cynthia. He knew that money was the only thing she truly cared about. And he had taken steps to protect his son, steps that had cost him his life. The last entry was from the day he died. Cynthia threatened me today.